may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy come true, and there shall be destruction and darkness come up in creation, and the beast shall reign over the earth.
Discover the Horror Podcast.
"1931 was the start of the reign of monsters. For the next 14 years, it was an all-out monster fest from Dracula, Frankenstein and his creature, werewolves, invisible men, mummies, and more. But that legacy, for the most part, came to an end in 1945 with the release of House of Dracula. While these famous monsters would continue to appear, mainly in comedies and usually with Abbott Costello, they just weren't the same, and it really was an end of that era. 1945 was also the same year that the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, forever changing the future of mankind. It showed us not only the massive power of atomic energy, but the sheer devastation it could leave in its path. Once we got to the 50s, things were very different as a country and even as a human race. With the discovery of atomic energy, it was supposed to open up the doorway to bigger and better things. Well, it sure did for the screenwriters of Hollywood, since now it gave them this new thing that they could exploit the shit out of. And that is exactly what they did. Since most of the common population didn't know much about atomic energy, it gave the filmmakers carte blanche to when they could come up with the facts. In other words, they just made stuff up, and most of the ticket-buying audience would think, yeah, that sounds about right. Case in point, apparently one of the most common side effects of this new source of power seems to make things grow to enormous proportions. Once that first film came out, it was an all-out race to come up with the next little thing that we could make big. We had grasshoppers, we had leeches, spiders, scorpions, praying mantis, and ants, and eventually throwing man into the mix. Were these tales of caution telling man to be careful because of what might happen, or just a quick exploitative tie-in? You decide. Now, the 50s wasn't the first time we saw a giant monster running amok. That would be King Kong from 1933. But since he was already that size to begin with, we're going to move past him and his lineage like Son of Kong, or even the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Of course, in 1954, we also had the father of all giant monsters, Godzilla, unleashed in Japan, symbolizing the massive destruction the country went through a decade earlier. It's a film that continues to this day to still pack one hell of a punch, as well as inspiring other films and filmmakers. The 50s is one of my favorite decades because of these kind of movies. In 1957 alone, there were 5 different films that had giant monsters on the loose, so it shows you the popularity of this particular subgenre. And that Hollywood knew when something was working, you just keep doing it. Welcome to Discover the Horror. Our goal is to give you reasons to explore horror you've never seen and give you new ways to see horror that you've loved for years. I'm John Kitley. I run Kitley's Crypt and a staff writer for Horror Hound magazine.
I'm Aaron Abishan. I teach film production and film studies at a university and write about horror just about anywhere I can.
I'm Damian Kalanick, co-creator of Living Dead Dolls.
There's nothing more terrifying than something so common in our lives, such as a small insect that we think of as a pest, when they grow to such an outrageous size that now they're looking at you as the one to get squashed, not to mention moving you down the food chain a few notches. It is those giant terrors of the screen that we are celebrating in this episode. We'll be discussing them from 1954, the Deadly Mantis from 1957, and the Black Scorpion from 1957 as well. Before we begin dissecting these little buggers, I've always thought these films were great for a younger audience since they can still be scary, but they are a lot of fun. But as an adult, how do you view this subgenre? Do you find them still effective in what they're doing, or is it more of a nostalgic way of just fun entertainment?
I fucking hate insects. They creep me out. I don't care how small they are or how big they are. I treat them all the same. They're all terrifying. I don't want them on me. I don't want them near me. I don't want them in the house. So I find these movies very effective. Even today. They're still like, ugh, ugh. Especially when they're really big and fucking monstrous.
He means watching behind his couch, peeking over the side.
Yeah, I think, it depends on the movie for me. I think all of them are fun. Although it's weird, this time I had a hard time staying in the moment with them. And I just think that's because it's just the end of my school year. Very often, though, I find these to be a great way to relax and just enjoy myself. But I also think like the first movie we're going to talk about, I think is just packed with really great subtext that gets recycled over and over again. I think all of the movies kind of have all the movies we're going to talk about tonight have an interesting sort of social take and cultural take which wouldn't fly today. They're all kind of about collaborations between experts at a certain level. They all paint a positive picture of science and the military in the United States for the most part. And so I think that they're also just a really interesting and kind of fun way to look back at a time where, you know, the American military and police were always the good guys, and scientists were maybe a little bit eccentric, but they were usually going to do the right thing. And there's nothing that a group of good, strong Americans couldn't do if they all put their minds together and figured out how to do it. And all these movies kind of exemplify that. So I think that there's something to be said for the worldview that they present as not being kind of an existing worldview in 2024 as we record this. So I think they're still relevant as a time capsule, at least.
Yeah, they are definitely dated in a lot of the way some characters are treated. But like you said, I do like the fact that they made science a viable way of defense against these things. It wasn't just the military. And in fact, sometimes the military are not the smartest guys in here. They might be the brave ones and stuff, but they're not necessarily the ones that can figure shit out.
I think it's a really exciting time in cinema when these movies started coming out in the early 50s and on. And even though they were just starting to replicate each other, it's just exciting that it was something new that was really catching on. The whole, like you said in the intro, the Atom Age, and to be there at the beginning when this was happening. I mean, it's almost like for our generation when the slasher film got really big, and then there was tons of slashers in the 80s was the slasher decade. To be this around in the early 50s when the big bug craze or the big monster craze was happening, and everything was like larger than life, and there was a lot of good films that came out from this.
I find it interesting that the way that they're exploiting the subject matter, I mean, that was still around the time where we could blow up at any time. Stuff was going on with after the atomic bomb, and really had no clue of what the after effects of that was going to be. So they're doing the testing and out in the desert, and yet we're going to not us, but kids are going to the movies and eating this stuff up. But on the same token, people have to be wondering, wait a minute, could this really happen?
And that's the thing, right? Nobody knew what the effects of any of this was. It was all new. Maybe this shit is real. Maybe it really could happen. And these movies were making crazy scientific fact, that we see today as so outlandish. Like, what are they talking about? This is like so impossible. But then they didn't know. Like, fuck, we'll make it up. Why not? We don't know of anything that's really happening. I mean, how many of these, movies do you go back and watch, and you're watching a scientist like I can't believe this person's a scientist.
Oh, there's plenty of those. Just the other day we were watching one, and the scientist is like, "Oh, this thing is being held up by some sort of kind of like matter, but different. It's like an antimatter," and you're going, "That's your explanation?"
I don't even know if they knew about antimatter then, though. I mean, antimatter is really a thing, and that's kind of one of the fun things about it. But I also think one of the things that it does is that it often posits real science. And I think our first film does a really good job of that too, where you get this like big lesson about ants. I think that another one of the films goes kind of crazy because for whatever reason they got a dinosaur specialist to come into the film in the one, but who says things like dinosaur science tries to look at the whole universe, which was a very strange statement, but I mean, like, you get this sort of plausibility moment in a lot of these films where they show you some real science, and that real science lends a little bit of legitimacy to whatever else it is that they're saying. So like I said, one of the things that I like about the 1950s looking past the incredible conservatism where everybody was not allowed to say certain things and whatever, that made it, extremely repressive. But there was a moment where it felt like a lot of Americans were kind of looking the same direction, where there was an optimism about the future, where there was a sense that if you take American military might and you take American scientific knowledge and you put those things together, you can do anything. And that's what we did 10 years later, right? We went to the moon, by basically putting military and science together, because that's what that was. And that's what this movie, or this group of movies that we're going to talk about tonight, were made during the time that America made a commitment to the idea of developing a space program. And it's like, you look at the cars, through the 1950s, how they look more and more like they're going fast, even when they're sitting still. And there's just this pervasive sense of optimism. We can do anything if we put our minds to it. And I kind of love that, because that certainly isn't a feeling that I think many Americans have right now. And so each of these films has that message kind of just packed right into it. And so, if you can get past all of the other stuff that we know was happening in the 50s, like segregation and sexism and blah, 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 which are all important things. Don't get me wrong. Those are important things to address, and I'm glad cinema does. But put that aside for a second and just look at that optimism. And these films all kind of have it. Spoiler alert, the good guys win.
Sometimes there's a little question mark at the end.
Horror was definitely having fun in the 50s. It was a fun time to go see a horror film.
Which brings a great valid point. These are horror movies, not sci-fi, horror movies. And I will fight that to my last breath. When you have
I think you get a lot of takers on that.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm going to be busy. When you have giant monsters attacking civilization, that's terrifying. That's a horror movie. Okay,
when
Nick?
it's a bunch of scientists in a movie that's fictional, I don't know. Maybe it's both.
I'm not going to get off that soapbox. I'm sorry.
You're like, I don't have any facts to back it up, but I'll scream until you shut up.
Nope. That's the way I work. Send hate mail to.
I teach that. I mention it a lot, but I teach this class about horror, and it's so important to me. And I don't talk about this era. I skip from, and I feel bad about it because I skip over the 40s too. But I talk about stuff in between. But the films that I show go from Frankenstein 1931. The next week, I show Curse of Frankenstein 1958, and I skip completely over this era. And that is because I plan a science fiction class to happen in the future, and I know it will be covered in that.
Yeah.
It will be deeply covered in that class. So I'm like, well, and I'm not saying that to be controversial, really. I'm just saying that I think both genre fans feel like they own this, and this is the one place where horror and science fiction fans overlap completely, I feel like.
Yeah, I do it more just because horror never gets the credit it deserves, but sci-fi will. So that's why I'm going to draw my line in the sand. Although, back to your point, though, I do find it interesting that we have the big bugs, and Hollywood exploits the shit out of it. Then we get into the space race and going out into outer space. Hollywood immediately jumps on that and starts. What happens if something comes back? So you have alien visitors and you have all this stuff. And I just love the fact that in the 50s, Hollywood was just like, okay, what's next? What are we doing now? Great idea.
Yeah. Although it is funny, we'll talk about this in a minute, but nobody would really pick up our first film at first. And even Warner passed on it to begin with for reasons that nobody understands, because 20,000, what is it? I always get the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Yeah. My brain always wants to turn that into 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and whatever. But Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was very successful for Warner just the previous year. So, yeah, they did take up a lot of things, but I still think that there was something in there that was like, we're not going to play this hokum,
Until it started making money.
And then it did. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, our first film was the top grossing film of its year of 1954 for Warner. So,
by direction of the President of the United States, stay in your homes. I repeat, stay in your homes. Your personal safety, the safety of the entire city, depends upon your full cooperation with the military authorities.
Yes, cities, nations, even civilization itself, threatened with annihilation because in one moment of history-making violence, nature, mad, rampant, wrought its most awesome creation. For born in that swirling inferno of radioactive dust were things so horrible, so terrifying, so hideous. There is no word to describe them.
Obviously, since we're talking about giant bug movies, we figured it would make sense to start at what is commonly thought of as being the beginning of the genre, 1954's classic Them. While it may be that you can find other titles before it that feature giant whatevers, Them's focus on a single species of critter, its examination of the implications and anxieties of atomic weapons, and the sterling quality of production it has cause it to be held up not just as the first big bug picture, but, according to many, the best of the big bug pictures. The film has, in my opinion, one of the most compelling opening sequences of science fiction and horror cinema. Police Sergeant Ben Peterson, played by James Whitmore, and his partner find a child wandering in the New Mexico desert, clearly in shock. Almost at the same time, they come upon an abandoned car and camper that, upon further examination, has been crumpled like a tin can on one side. After his partner is snatched away, we learn that there are giant ants on the offensive in the New Mexico desert. Ben teams up with FBI agent Bob Graham, played by Gunsmoke legend James Arness, as well as Dr. Harold Medford, as well as Dr. Harold Medford, who is a world-renowned ant specialist. They did say what an ant specialist was called, but I forgot to write it down. And his daughter, Pat, who is also a doctor as well. Now, Mr. Dr. Medford, helps the other characters and us understand ant behavior, and he explains that it was the initial atomic bombs detonated in 1945 that mutated regular ants, causing this whole thing. With the help of some military muscle, they successfully take on a colony of ants at their nest in the desert. But then they discover that 2 queen ants have escaped and set up shop in the underground flood tunnels in Los Angeles. Will the team be able to stop them? Dun dun dun! Now, the film had a hard time, as I mentioned, finding a studio to champion it, but Warner Brothers took it on, and it was shot from September to November of 1953. Initially, it was intended to be shot and released in color and in 3D, but the film we have today is black and white because Warner didn't have enough faith in it to put the extra money behind it. And why Warner didn't have more faith in this film is confusing, as we said, because The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms had been a huge hit the previous year. But at least they released it, and it was a smash. As we also said, it was the highest-grossing film of 1954 and has gone on to be considered a classic. Thanks to a solid cast, fast-paced direction by Gordon Douglas, and smart writing that located American anxieties about the dangers of their new atomic world perfectly for the time, Them sparked a frenzy of copycat films that came out in the next 3 or 4 years and now define a classic era, as we mentioned, of American sci-fi and horror. So, first question, do you guys think it deserves its reputation?
Yes.
Absolutely. All
right, done.
You think like you think so you see all these giant bug movies and you think they're all just lumped together and it's it's all the same thing. It's a giant bug, they're attacking, the military comes, defeats them, the end. But I think, to me, Them really stands out as a great structured monster movie. It really hits all the beats at the perfect time, and it's amongst all the other giant bug movies. I think this one is obviously the top of the heap.
I think this is highly effective. It still works. It's one of the I want to say it's one of the few that, taking the ant situation outside or away from the movie, it's still a strong, compelling story of what the characters are going through. But then you have the ants, which I fucking love when they build the actual creatures. When it's not, nothing against Mr. Gordon, but when you superimpose something, or even Jack Arnold in Tarantula, when you superimpose a real creature, it doesn't look real. These guys built these big, huge animatronic ants, or antomatronic ants, maybe. I just think it's really effective, and the scenes where they're busting in through one of the walls of the was it the radar or one of the stations, the police stations or something? That was pretty freaking effective as well. I mean, that thing comes lunging in there with the pinchers. I love that.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting that we have a cop on the beat and an FBI guy that get to dress in army uniforms just because they're gonna go tackle them. But okay, never
And
mind.
shoot bazookas, apparently.
Yeah,
That's where the little 50s ridiculousness comes in.
exactly. We'll see that later too.
They're like, "Are you already here? Here, have the bazooka. Sure, why not?"
Like,
You
you're
need
a
some. You
cop.
need some new clothes. Here, we'll get you some new clothes.
You're
Yeah.
a cop. You discovered this, but we're going to let you stick with this case the entire way, even though you're just like a regional police officer, and the FBI is involved, and the military.
That's right. You can sit at the table with the general. But let's back up for a second, because I really want to talk, before we go too far into the movie, I really want to talk about that opening sequence, because I think it's so effective. Because there's a lot of ways you can start this film, but starting it with a near catatonic 5-year-old girl is such a cool way to get into how scary these things are and how destructive they are. Just this little girl wandering in the desert. Is there anything more, like anything more that our hearts go out to than a lost little girl? Is there anything that we empathize with more quickly? Is there anybody that we want to protect? And like, you realize, how completely helpless she is and how completely lucky she is to have survived this thing. And then that sequence at the end of that scene where we hear the ants for the first time, and she's been laying down completely catatonic and she sits bolt upright, you know, uh, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think that moment was genuinely freaky. Like, for a second, you're like, "Uh-oh." And I just watched it today. I've seen this movie 10 times or something like that. And I'm like, "Oh man, that was really effective." So I just think it's an astonishingly good, I mean, to me, half the reason why this movie is as good as it is because they found it in this really smart, really suspenseful, really kind of empathy building sequence where you learn to really like the cop, you learn to really empathize with the little girl, even though she's not a major character in the rest of the film. But you learn what you need to know to be freaked out by these ants. So they don't look great by modern standards. They look certainly great by 1954 standards, but they feel very real to me because we believe from the get-go that they are what they say they are.
Yeah, they don't really make jest of any of this. Everyone takes it very seriously in the movie, what they're doing and stuff like that. I feel like every so often I revisit this film and I'm like, God, I forgot how good of a movie this was.
I also think that because they show the devastation of the little girl's family's trailer, that emphasizes of what these are before we even know what they're. I don't even know if I think on the initial poster it did show the ants, so everybody knew it was giant ants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But by seeing the devastation of that trailer, you've already putting this stuff in your head. Oh my God, this must be huge. It must be powerful. But I got to say, the first appearance coming over that hill, that's like epic Hollywood classic footage right there. I mean, that's right up there with Psycho and all these other famous clips. When you see the woman up by the the sand dunes, and that head starts to come over,
Yeah.
that is
Right.
just brilliant filmmaking there.
Yeah.
And the sound that the ants make, and you hear that long before you ever see the ants themselves. So
Yeah.
and nobody knows what's making that sound or where it's coming from. So that's some nice foreshadowing.
The sound is a chorus of bird voiced tree frogs of the southeastern United States, and occasionally there's a gray tree frog as well. That's what it was.
You could totally hear the gray one at times.
Yeah, right? Like, there's old gray.
I think he was more of a chartreuse green or blue.
And we'll hear that sound again, by the way, a little later tonight.
Yeah.
I think this movie is so well founded. So whatever else happens after this, we're set on solid foundations.
Well, and they also, as you mentioned, this is a serious story. I mean, um, James Whitmore is like the epitome of a hero. He's doing whatever he can, and when he goes in not to give too many spoilers, but to help save those two lost boys. I mean, that's got to be terrifying for these little kids, and they show them being scared out of their wits.
Right.
Um, and with the ants in there, again, it's done really well. It's not winking at the camera at all, which I think really in some of the later films they do get a little bit more schlocky, where you're going, really, that's what we're going to do. But in here, you don't get that feeling as much as in the later ones that are going to come out. Um, but I also wanted to point out how many fucking people are in this movie with little bit parts. Did you guys see that in the credits? Everybody that's in there, you have Fess Parker, who would later become Daniel Boone because of this movie.
Yeah,
Then we
Fess
have
had a
our,
great little part too.
oh, he was awesome in there. And I love the fact that he's not crazy, but we're not going to say anything until this is all done because we don't want him out. So they're
So
That
going
was
to
a
leave the poor
crazy
guy in a
move.
nut house.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was such a sinister move.
Yeah.
Like it really changes, I think. Like it's a thing that we've talked about recently. We talked about it with the Creature episode, which is just releasing this week as we're recording this. But there's this thing that I think played differently at that time. And I think it goes back to that conservatism we were talking about before, where, one person having to be sacrificed for the greater good wasn't such a big deal. So the idea that they knew that. So for anybody who hasn't seen the film out there, basically this character is locked up in a loony bin. That's how they refer to it, because he was flying an airplane and saw a UFO that looked a hell of a lot like a flying ant. And they were like, yeah, what a nut job. And then they lock him up. And then he tells his story to these characters, including this FBI agent. And as they're leaving, the FBI agent, James Arness's character, says to the doctor, you got to keep him locked up. He's dangerous, And they're like, oh, we were going to let him go.
We'll let you know when he's not dangerous anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Rather than to just talk to him and be like, hey, man, you're right. These things do exist. Will you be quiet about it? Okay.
Yeah. Or we're going to leave you in here. You'll get out. Then again, I don't know if I'd fucking trust him anyway, but it just seemed really weird.
Well, so Walt Disney screened this movie with James Arness in mind to play Davy Crockett until he saw how
Fess Parker.
yeah, crazy he or how good he acted crazy, and he
Yeah.
got cast as Davy Crockett instead.
I bet Arness was pretty happy about that.
Yeah, because he got cast in Gunsmoke.
I was going to say,
For
and I got to
20
say,
years.
right. James Arness is one of those actors who I can't see him as anything but Marshall Matt Dillon. I think if you're a certain age, Gunsmoke was so ubiquitous, so constantly on television when I was a kid, that I feel like it just that's James Arness. That's who he is. He suffers from that. So I bet younger people, if you're listening to the show and you've never seen this, you never saw Gunsmoke, it's not going to do much for you. But man, I think if you're anywhere between the ages of, I don't know, like 45 and 90, James Arness is going to be Matt Dillon when you see him.
Yeah.
And who was James Arness's brother?
I just lost his name. Peter Graves.
And
that's
what
right.
big bug movie did Peter Graves star in?
I don't know.
Was it beginning of the end?
Beginning of the end. Was it like
Red-Eye
Grasshopper?
Gordon. Giant grasshoppers
for
running
God's
over
sakes.
paper.
All roads lead back to Bird-Eye Gordon and his goddamn animal hatred.
Hey, at least they weren't hurting real buildings. They were just running over paper cutouts of buildings. Anyway, also Leonard Nimoy is in this.
Leonard Nimoy,
Yeah,
small bit part.
uncredited.
Yeah.
We have Dub Taylor, our favorite character actor that always plays the same kind of character because he's the same in this one.
I saw he was in it, but I don't remember seeing him.
He was the railroad inspector that was fired because of
The sugar.
somebody stole the sugar and he got in trouble for it.
Yeah. Okay.
Very
That makes
young Dub Taylor.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard to
But
to even
immediately recognizable. The minute he starts talking, you're like, "Fuck, that's Dub Taylor."
Dub Taylor's one of those guys though that even when you see him young, you're like, he was never really young. That was me.
Yeah, he was always angry. Then you have Dick York from Bewitched, William Schaller, who is in a ton of these movies. But then the drunk in the in the nut house, I think, or the recovery hospital or whatever, the one that wanted to be in charge in the charge of the booze from the military.
Mm.
That's the old man from the Blob.
Yeah, right.
So apparently he was never got off the booze and ended up being a homeless guy out in the woods and got dissolved for his troubles.
And by the way, I would say that the one best thing about watching this movie is that his song "Make Me a Sergeant, Give Me the Booze"
Yeah.
did not stick in my head because I was like, that is going to be there for the rest of my day.
It's make me in charge of the booze. Put me in charge of the booze.
Make me a
Oh my
sergeant.
God.
Put me in charge of booze. Make me a sergeant.
That should have been a Jump Blues song or something, you know?
But also the getting back to 1945 with House of Dracula, Onslow Stevens, is it Stevens or Steve? Yeah, Stevens is one of the majors in there, or the what is he? He's a general, brigadier general.
I can't think of what else he was in.
House of Dracula. He was the mad scientist, the one that becomes half vampire, half. He's the one that cures Larry Talbot.
Indeed.
Oh yeah.
It's his place.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
His
know why
daughter
that
gets
name just
bitten.
didn't. That's right. Why the name just fell out of my brain, but you're right.
And then, of course, Edmund Gwenn, who played a Dr. Harold Melford, is also Santa Claus from Miracle on 34th Street.
Miracle on 34th Street, yeah.
Which I just thought was funny. Then, in the meantime, when, in the off season, he's studying ants.
And apparently he was having a hard time of it. Apparently they had to shoot this, like the scenes in Los Angeles. It was like 92 degrees outside and they were wearing wool.
Yeah. Is he the one? He suffered from arthritis pretty badly. I think one thing that that this starts with, and you'll see it in a lot of these later films, you'll have a female character that is intelligent. She has an important job, like his daughter in here is a fellow doctor. But then they're like, yes, there's a very smart person. She's a woman, and then that's all we're going to do with it. Now she's going to be a love interest, or you're going to have the typical stuff in there. And it's a shame that they start down that path, but then it's just used for the typical stuff that women were cast for back then.
They do a couple of things in this movie that are kind of like both kind of progressive and ass backwards. So two things I can think of in particular, and both of them are James Arness's lines, when they introduced the female doctor, I was thinking, what, 1954, a lady doctor? That's pretty forward thinking. And the first fucking thing out of that guy's mouth is, if she's a sick people doctor, I think I'm going to whip up a fever, like just yuck, And then the other thing is whenever he gets mad at her at one point and he's like, whatever the ant doctor, myrmecologist, see, that's what I mean. Why don't we all just talk English and then we can all start from the same place? And it's like, we're all supposed, like, his ignorance level is supposed to be where we're supposed to start from,
That's
like,
the baseline.
if you're smarter, right? If you're smarter than me, you're a dumb egghead, and I don't want to listen to your horse shit, But anybody who didn't talk at his level, he'd be like, come on, you dummy, catch up, you just, so there's a couple of things that are kind of both forward and backward. And I was really like, the other thing that I think of, I kind of always forget that James Arness is in this. To me, he's Marshall Matt Dillon, or he's the big carrot monster from The Thing from Another World. And The Thing from Another World is also a movie that is really packed with that mentality of scientists are all goofy eggheads, and they kind of play with the goofy egghead in here a little bit with Dr. What's his name? Mefford. I can't remember. Medford. Dr. Medford, they play with him being kind of a goofball occasionally, but ultimately he is the one who, provides them with a way to like shoot him in the antennae, that kind of stuff.
Plus he's also, he's pretty sure right from the get-go what these are, but he knows if he said that right off the bat, they're giant ants, they're going to go, who the fuck called this guy? He waits until they go, look, there's a fucking giant ant. That's what's doing it. Everybody else is going, holy shit. He's right.
Well, look what they did to the one guy. I mean, they're like, of course, this guy's smart enough to be like, they're going to put me in the booby hatch.
Yeah. Oh, when I was reading on this, there's a quote from the director that during the editing, he asked the editor, how did the film look? And the editor just goes, fine. he goes, well, does it look honest? And the editor goes, as honest as a 12-foot ant can look. But I think the ants look good. I think they perform well. Anytime you're going to have a larger animal like or a larger creature like that, it's going to move slower than what it would in real life, only because of how they're operating it. And that goes for the other films that we're going to talk about.
Mhm.
Well, one of them. But again, I think they look cool as hell. I think they're threatening as hell. And you add in that scratchy sound noise that they're making, I think it's amazing. It still holds up.
Yeah, and they're not in shadow. You know, they don't have a heavy cast shadow that you can't see, and they're out in like bright daylight.
Yeah.
I know if I was in the situation I saw a giant ant, I would definitely be shitting my pants. Shit, I fucking see 100 ants, I start shitting my pants. For normal size, I get worried.
Yeah, the scenes with them in the caverns when you see the partial ants poking their heads out and stuff. Again, I just as a kid I thought that was the coolest thing, and watching it now, whether it's you're seeing it through those same eyes, it's still entertaining. And I can't I can never watch these films and not be entertained. Whether
Yeah.
you want to call it dumb fun or nostalgic or whatever, I just think they still hold up. And to your point, Aaron, I think there's a lot of really good filmmaking in here, smart filmmaking that sometimes gets pushed aside because of the subject matter.
Yeah, and I just like I said, it's such an interesting thing to see. Like, these movies are a product of their time, and they also remind us how different of an America we live in. One of the things I really enjoyed was when they announced martial law, and they were like, "So we're suspending all media broadcasts, but you need to keep your radios and TVs on, and we're announcing that martial law has been declared." Like that, you could not announce martial law in this country anymore. I mean, it wouldn't be a fair plot point. You wouldn't be able to use it because nobody would believe that it would
Yeah.
end in anything. I mean, if you saw a movie in 2024 that announced martial law, the next thing you would see is riots.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
I mean,
You're taking away my freedom.
that's right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I only say fat guys attacking state capitals because I have this image in my mind of a bunch of dudes in camouflage attacking the state capitol in Michigan over the mask stuff that happened, back during the pandemic. That's literally what happened. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions. I'm just literally describing a thing that happened in one state when we had lockdowns. So it's just like we know we live in a very different world than the world that this was took place in. One of the things I love about cinema too, it's a time capsule. It's always a time capsule. You mentioned,
Yeah.
John, that it's a product of its time, and it is that, but I didn't mean that as a slight. I didn't mean that to suggest that it felt dated in a negative way. It just feels dated in as much as it allows us to see how much we've changed as a country.
Yeah.
Well, if there was ever any doubt of the importance of this movie, James Cameron heavily borrowed them for Aliens. And there's a YouTube video that shows side by side comparisons between the two films, and it's a little very close for comfort. They both they find a little girl in the beginning who doesn't speak. In them, the armies enter the LA sewers, the Marines enter, what is it, LV-47 or whatever,
Yeah.
in very similar fashions. The first exposures to the ants in the sewers and in the Aliens, they both have like light shined on them, and then everyone just starts fucking blasting. The very similar egg chamber scenes that are found, and then they get torched with a flamethrower.
That's it. I hate aliens now. What a crock.
I mean, we'll have to post this. We'll have to post this link to this YouTube video that has the side by side shots, but it's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah,
Aliens really
it occurred to me
borrows
right
them.
when they started hosing the ants down that were down in the hole when they went to the ant colony and they started shooting flamethrowers into them. I was like, this feels a lot like alien movies to me all of a sudden, and I had not thought about that before. But I was like, oh yeah, I think I see some similarities here.
A lot of similarities. Yeah.
Yeah,
I also like in the film where they don't really question in throughout most of the film the fact that these are mutated, or at least they think they're mutated from the atomic blast. And I think at one point someone mentions, I wonder what else could be affected. But at the very end, the last line that Dr. Melford said or says is, when man entered the atomic age, he opened the door to a new world. What we will eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict. If you're a little kid sitting in a theater in 1954 watching this, you'd be shitting yourself going, oh my God, they're going to be giant grasshoppers? Actually, yes. Are they going to be giant scorpions? Actually, yes. Just wait to the theater. But I love the fact that they left that like dun dun dun, like the big question mark in the blob. Is this the end? We don't know.
Yeah, right. Because like here it is, the first big bug movie, and they're like, "Yep, anything can happen. Here you go, guys. Now everyone make their own, atomic movie from here."
Kind of reminds me like you see in the movies where all the news guys go running to the
Yeah,
phones, calling to the studios, boss, I got a great idea.
yeah. It's like they were like, "Here, have at it. We paved the way for you. Now go do your thing."
Yeah, and I love that character too. I love that the when the doctor, kind of oscillates back and forth between kind of ridiculousness. Like I kind of love the little character embellishment at the beginning where he doesn't have his goggles on; they're just around his neck, and they're like, you should put the goggles on your eyes, and he's like, "Oh, that's much nicer." Yes,
Yeah,
but then later has these lines with such gravity. I love I mean, I've said it before on the show. For me, you know, a successful film is always going to have peaks and valleys, and I feel the same way about characters. I've often said that the movie High Tension just does not resonate with me because it just goes to 11 and stays there all the time. And I feel the same way about characters who only have one plot point. Like all they do is the one thing. They're the mustache twirling villain or whatever. But I love this doctor because he's kind of a goofball. He gets all mad because he has to use regular radio protocol. He's like, well, he knows that I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm
yeah,
not saying over and out. Like, so he has all these little peccadillos that make him seem kind of idiotic at times, but then he delivers these speeches with great gravity. And I think, John, the speech that you talk about, that very night, not speech, but that little line at the end is my favorite line in the film. But he alludes to it previously a few times. And he even says, we're not looking at the beginning of something, or we're not looking at the end of the ants. We're looking at the beginning of but the potential beginning of the end of humanity. And so there's this tinge of an apocalyptic feeling that kind of keeps cropping up over and over in this film. So at the beginning we were talking about whether or not these movies are kind of bubblegum fun for kids, and it's like you said, it's like there's a suggestion that the world's going to end.
Because doesn't he in the beginning quote the Bible or something about end of days?
Yeah.
yeah.
So here, kiddies, here you go. Choke on that popcorn.
A witness to a biblical prophecy come true. That's what he says.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very effective. But I also think you're right though. I think this is a good kid film. If you're looking for a film that the kids can watch, there's nothing in here that's too obscene. There is, though, the suggestion that giant ants might eat the world. But you got to grow up sometime.
They'll start in New Jersey. Damien, you'll be out there with his flamethrower.
I will. They don't even need to be giant. I will fucking torch those motherfuckers. Ruin my.
That's how you're gonna learn how to build a boat. We're setting sail. We're done with land.
Right. Can ants swim?
Of course, that's where they ended up, was a boat, wasn't it? That's where the giant ants ended up, was a boat. Yeah, don't leave your hatches open, Damien.
If you're going to have a boat, that means you go on the water.
Just don't go in the water.
Yeah.
Sometimes
you just skip along the top of it.
Yeah, sometimes that doesn't work out so well for some people.
No, anything with tentacles, that'll never work.
I hate to tell you guys, but if you can't handle water or any kind of bugs, pretty much 100% of the earth is off limits. You go live in Antarctica. That's what you got. That's frozen water. That's where the thing happened.
Well, our next film.
Yeah.
That's true.
In all the kingdom of the living, there is no more deadly or voracious creature than the praying mantis. You think you'll be able to drive it out to sea?
I hope so. Every device of military science, every defensive weapon, radar, planes, rockets, marshaled to destroy 1,000 tons of beastly fury. A monster leaving a trail of carnage, spreading panic across a continent.
So I picked The Deadly Mantis from 1957. You know, the quote, one of the worst sci-fi films made by Universal. Well, that's according to scholar Bill Warren in his book Keep Watching the Skies. And he's not alone and the only one to criticize the film. Author Mark Thompson McGee says the film is not even for the birds. Now, we're all entitled to our opinions, so I'm here to tell you that they're wrong. So wrong, in fact, that I consider this to be my favorite giant insect film of the 50s. Sure, the movie is filmed with a bit of stock footage. Okay, more than a bit. But that's all part of the fun. And sure, the science is a little wonky or downright wrong. But who cares? We have a giant praying mantis attacking Air Force bases, skyscrapers, and city buses. Now, the film starts off by showing us a map of the world, giving us some prolific narration, telling us stuff like, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It's pretty impressive, huh? Then we get a volcano exploding on one part of the world, which causes a glacier to break apart on the other side of the globe, releasing the giant mantis that has been encased in ice for centuries? Who knows? Then we get some more stock footage where we learn about the northern radar fences in Canada and farther north so we can spot any attacks from the other side of the world. Of course, the only problem is that when our nasty mantis starts causing holy havoc, the military can't seem to figure out anything. That's when you call in the scientists. After a lot of what it's not, they finally conclude that, quote, in all the kingdom of the living, there is no more deadly or voracious creature than the praying mantis. Again, that is some top-notch screenwriting there. Directed by Nathan Giron, who started his career as an art director, even bringing home an Oscar for his work on the film How Green Was My Valley in 1942. When he did move into directing, he brought that visual sense to him, and his first picture was The Black Castle from 1952, which starred Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney Jr. And I think his visual style made that film better looking than it should have been, or could have been. He didn't make a ton of films in his career, but he did make a few that are highly memorable amongst the genre fans, such as 20 Million Miles to Earth, The Brain from the Planet Eros, and The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman from 1958. The film stars Craig Stevens as our military hero that seems to go above and beyond his duties, even when it seems like what he's doing should be someone else's job. Stevens was most known for playing the detective Peter Gunn on the hit TV series. We also have William Hooper, who plays our scientist, Nedrick Jackson, who does a great job acting like a real scientist. When the military is rushing him to find out what's doing the attacking, complaining that all they're doing is finding out what it's not, Jackson points out that that's part of science. It's by figuring out what it's not, it narrows down what it is. Pretty smart thinking there, kiddos. Hooper also played the father of one of cinema's first child sociopaths, Rhonda Penbark, in The Bad Seat from 1956. Now, our female role here, we have Alex Talton, who's a photojournalist who unfortunately does nothing other than make our military boys freak out when she goes up to one of the bases up north. Apparently, they have forgotten what a woman looks like, which I'm sure glad those guys aren't doing anything important up there. But all the reasons that we're here is because of the actual mantis. And again, for those that design and build the actual monster, I have to give a special shout out to because it's awesome. Created by Fred Noth and Cleo E. Baker, it was a puppet or a marionette that was about 20 inches long, controlled by wires and cables. Now, while it did move a little slow, I think it's one of the most impressive looking of all of these giant monsters of that era. The guys that worked on these worked on a ton of films, but because they were part of the studio system, a lot of their work never really gets credited. Baker had built a bunch of miniature sets on a lot of the early Universal monster films. So again, if you're looking for a film that's up for an Oscar, then you're going to find its flaws here. But if you're looking for a fun monster flick with a badass creature, then I give you The Deadly Mantis.
I liked it. I had a fun time with it. It's a fun monster movie. You know, I can't. If I have to complain, I feel like there was too many scenes of the mantis flying. and I would have rather seen the Mantis destroying shit instead. He just seemed weird when he was flying around back and forth all the time.
When he attacks a military base, I think when he comes over the glacier or over the mountain or whatever that is, I thought that was freaking epic. And it does look a little similar to Jack Arnold's tarantula by looking in the window and stuff.
I thought the praying mantis looked great in this. I really liked it a lot. Very effective.
The first act of this film feels remarkably like a film strip in grade school to me over and over again, and I say that in like a very fond way. There's something about it that draws me in, and I think you have to be of a certain age. I think you have to be a baby boomer or a Gen X person for that to resonate. Because I also think that the baby boomers and the Gen X people grew up with the same educational paraphernalia, just maybe slightly updated, but still it has that vibe. I saw a lot of things that had the good American square-jawed narrator, kind of a guy in the background talking about whatever. But there is a goddamn solid minute of silently zooming in on a map that begins this film. And I was like, come on, man. I mean, that you are burning some time. I mean, I counted it. It's 60 fucking seconds of zooming in on a map.
That is the stuff that I find fun. Because these films usually have stuff in there, the narration, the ungodly amount of stock footage. But I just, it's part of the charm to these films is what the part that I like about them. And yeah, the fact that there's like 6 minutes of stock footage in between the shot of the mantis in the ice, and then I think we go back to stock footage, and then you have the whole map thing, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. Plus, then we learn all about the radar fences. I mean, come on, you're actually learning something.
Such a thing existed. I didn't know there was all these radar fences.
Also, what is that a picture of? What is Conad? Because Conad looks awfully like a creepy sex dungeon castle to me. It's like, this is Conad. And, like they show this weird square castle thing, and you're like, is it? Are you sure? And then I love my favorite thing, though, is the 3.5 minutes they spend telling us where the phones go. This phone in 60 seconds you can be connected to this. This phone in 40 seconds you'd be connected to this, and in this phone in 3 seconds you could be connected to this. And it was like, man, that's interesting. But like you said, John, there was something really charming about that, and I think it's great too because it makes the watching of the film with a group that much more fun. Because as soon as they you got 4 phones, as soon as they announce what the first phone is and truck the camera a little bit, you have three chances to make a funny joke about what phones 2, 3, and 4 are actually for. Because who really gives a shit what they're actually for at that point? It doesn't matter at all. But you can have fun extrapolating what they might be for. And also, why a paleontologist? What?
Well,
why would they call a paleontologist?
Because it's a bone cartilage thing.
Wasn't the mantis was prehistoric, right?
I mean, yeah, but it's also like, it just felt like such a weird decision. Like, I can see why they'd call him at first, and they're like, oh, much like in the first film we watched, you would then call an expert on mantises. But no, we just stay with the paleontologist, and that's who we know.
They didn't know that it was a mantis part at the time.
Yes,
that's right.
You find a piece that's 5 feet long, which I don't know if that was actually 5 feet, but you're not going to go, I think this is from an insect.
No, that was his contribution. But that's what I'm saying. After he's like, I think it's a mantis, then they're like, wow. Okay, let's get on the phone and call a mantis specialist. And instead
they didn't have another one of those phones.
Yeah, that's right.
They only got 4 phones.
They're like, fuck, we should have put a phone into the mantis guy. Why didn't we think that through?
I think the craziest stock footage is when they show in the beginning all those Eskimos terrified.
That's actually from a different film, and I don't remember the film that they took that footage from.
It was like SOS.
Yeah, something like that.
But I was like, where did they fucking dig this stock footage up from?
All the kids have like snot dried on their face, and all the dogs are dirty. I was like, this is not flattering stock footage. These look like people who all need to be wiped off.
SOS Iceberg from 1933.
I also like the part where they're charting the flight of the mantis down, And they're like, okay, he's like he's here, and then he's like, he's in New Orleans, and then they're like, okay, we have to make our way to DC, and I'm like, wait, what? That's in a completely opposite direction.
Most of these films of that era, you always have someone figuring the map out, going, we got to figure out where it's going, so we got to draw on a map and we got to do this. I also like the stock footage that they used of the radar corps, the civilian radar
Yeah,
corps.
that was very
That
interesting.
was that was a real thing
Yeah.
back in the wartime. That people were trained to identify different aircraft. So they just threw that stock footage. Okay, you're not looking for a B-2 bomb, a 52 bomber. You're looking for a giant praying mantis. Looks like this.
They're like, okay, praying mantis, got
Okay.
it. We're looking.
I really liked, though, one of my favorite things about this film. It's a weird moment, but at the beginning, very near the beginning, there's a scene where the plane gets hit and it's inside the cockpit, and that guy kind of body of a guy kind of rolls out onto the pilot or the co-pilot or whatever, and it feels very modern to me. Like it's very kind of everything rolls into the foreground and the camera shakes and jostles around with the action. And I thought that was a really cool shot for this little movie. And I realized also it was probably just, almost a mistake. The camera maybe wasn't supposed to get hit or whatever, and they just rolled with it because it looked good. But whatever, I thought it was a very effective scene that kind of presaged a much more modern way of filming, where the camera would have moved around a lot more. Or, in modern days, the camera never sits still. And in this movie, it's pretty stagey. The camera will pan and tilt, but it doesn't do much more than that.
Plus, again, they show the damage when they go to investigate, and you see the damage from the radar station or whatever. Again, it gives you an effective sense of what they're dealing with or how much damage it can do. I always like that. Although it makes you wonder, they only make 2 tracks in the snow. They don't move around. They just 2 landing tracks or take out whatever those are, and then that's it. No walking around. No. That's interesting.
That would have made the plot so complex that we wouldn't have been able to understand it.
Or the paleontologist wondering, "Oh fuck, that's a giant praying mantis. Obvious. Look at the tracks."
A friend of mine, I would go over his house, and he had like 2 bushes by his front door, and by one of the bushes was a praying mantis was living in there. So I go over his house one night and knocking on the door, and he opens the door. He's like, "Hey, come on in." And I walk in his house, walk past him, and he sees the praying mantis jumped on the back of my shoulder. And I go into his house, and I turn and I go to sit down on the couch and like lean back. He's like, "Don't move, don't lean back, and whatever you do, don't look over your shoulder." So I just like fucking freeze, and he goes and he gets like a little like Tupperware thing or something to like scrape it off me and bring it back outside. He's like, "There was a praying mantis and on your shoulder, and I know if you turned your head and looked at it, you would have freaked the fuck out." Which I absolutely would have like lost my shit if I saw a fucking praying mantis, because I would have looked, and it would have looked like the praying mantis in this movie, a giant thing staring back at me, ready to eat me.
You would have heard the same noise and everything.
Yeah, no, I get it, man. I get these movies; they're terrifying.
Oh.
Right now, where I live, we're having a once a century infestation of cicadas, and so like a friend of ours posted, they're coming from the west, and so they're moving towards the river, towards the Mississippi. And so a friend of mine was showing us some pictures, and there's literally an image of this tree, and you can't see the trunk because it's just completely covered with cicadas. The ground everywhere is covered with cicadas. So I think, Damien, you probably wouldn't be able to go outside if you lived in Missouri right now.
Absolutely not. And and I have to say, I need a flamethrower.
Well, that's on the upside. Missouri is a place you could probably get one of those too. So I say probably. I actually know people who have a flamethrower here. So
Wow.
Yeah, you could for sure. Yeah.
It's interesting with this movie that they did not blame atomic radiation or anything. It's just like a giant prehistoric mantis frozen in the ice, because back in whatever pre-Cro-Magnon stage, There was giant
Well,
praying mantis.
they didn't want to step on the toes of these other things that went, oh, it's atomic energy. We're going to go, hey, let's do something different. This one was frozen in ice and was huge.
Yeah, and it is kind of an interesting thing that we did because we kind of jumped from the very beginning of the cycle to very near the end, right? I mean, 57, we're looking pretty close to the end of the big bug cycle. There's some stuff in between, but I think you're right. Like by 57, they were like, okay, well, we've worn out this atomic thing, so
Yeah.
what else do we have? Because neither of our second two movies are atomic in explanation.
Yeah.
Well, again, 57, there was, what did I say, 5 or 6 films, giant bug movies, all in that same year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, man, being a kid back in the waiting for the theaters going, oh, wait, we got ants this time. Oh, wait, well, now we got grasshoppers. Oh, we got this.
Exactly. It's I think this, like I said, it was a really fun time for horror cinema.
In the 50s, in rural areas especially, nobody had air conditioning, so it was hot in your house. It was a great way to take your kids to the drive-in where it'd be cool and you could sit outside and have something fun to do for a pretty cheap price. And now you're watching all of these movies that by necessity take place outside, And so, I mean, how great is that you're out there seeing these giant bug movies and all of a sudden these giant bugs in this outdoor environment are like projected 50 feet tall or 100 feet tall, however big your screen is in front of you. I mean, can you think of any cycle of movies that's better for a drive-in?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's just perfect.
The Skyline Drive-In in Indianapolis, or Shelbyville, south of Indianapolis, they did a big monster series a couple of years ago, and they screened Deadly Mantis. So I got to see that on a big drive-in screen. And to your pointer, and I mean, it's just, you talk about just being in heaven, sitting there outside at the drive-in watching these huge fucking monsters come across on the big screen. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's why it's, I don't have a lot of horror shirts that don't directly tie into a property, but the one that I'm currently wearing, which I got back when I was a member of the Famous Monsters fan club, I love so much because it's just really people at a drive-in with a giant tarantula and a UFO coming out of the drive-in screen, because I love that idea. There was a time, and I especially feel like, the UFO movies, whatever, but I've always thought that there's just not a better kind of film to see at the drive-in than a giant bug or giant monster movie in general, because again, like I said, it already takes place outside. So it's really easy to see yourself being actually attacked. I mean, for a moment, you could probably almost be like, uh-oh, that's really happening. You could give yourself that feel. Sorry, Damien.
Every time I go outside, looking over my shoulder.
When a praying mantis lands on his shoulder at the drive-in while watching the Deadly Mantis.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, right now it'd be really bad if you were back here in my home state watching things in the drive-in, because the cicadas would be dive bombing you and sticking on your nose and shit.
Not in a million years.
Yeah, you and my wife, you'd be good to, like hanging out together, so holding up together during those, because
in our bubble.
Yeah, she's a mess right now.
Yeah, you should get her a flamethrower.
Then you can have each other's flank, right? You can go back to back.
Yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, we're all toasted marshmallows because they're not looking.
No, that was a very fun little movie. I don't think it has quite the same gravity as them, but I think that it's still a fun monster movie.
Agreed.
It is prominently displayed in the It Came From Hollywood parody movie with Gilda Radner. And I still remember because Cheech and Chong are in the audience, and the part comes up right before it's going to attack the bus. And every time I watch this, I hear Cheech saying it's Attack of the 50-foot chicken wing. Because that's all you see coming out of the fog is this big wing thing. So it's one of those that it always resonates in my head when I see that. But it's a fun movie, and again, if you want to start your kids off on monster movies, but don't want to go, right into necromantic, start off a little slow. Throw some of these 50s movies on there. They're gonna enjoy it.
I wonder if there's anybody out there who's listening to this show that's like, yeah, we should show our kids Necromantic. That's a good idea.
Should we put a disclaimer? Please do not watch Necromantic with your children.
You should even show your friends Necromantic.
Yeah.
You
Start 'em
certainly
off
shouldn't
with
watch it at
something-
the same time because you're all going to be real uncomfortable whenever it comes to the condom
Yeah.
scene.
Start out with something easier and more palatable, like I don't know,
Serbian
Salo
film.
or something.
Yeah.
Serbian film.
How did we end up mentioning that utter depravity on this particular episode? Nice job, John.
I think that'll be me. Let's see. Pissed off sci-fi fans, pissed off parents. Check.
Astonishingly, we haven't done anything to piss off the baby boomers who are monster fans yet. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe we'll get a letter.
Show's not over.
Well, then maybe we should move to the next film so that we can have a shot at it.
Nation's leaders confer as news received of possible threat to capital.
This is a city of 4 million people. If word of these leaks out, the panic of the population could be worse than the scorpions.
The Black Scorpion destroys communications. Hundreds annihilated.
So, my choice is The Black Scorpion from 1957. It was directed by Edward Ludwig, who has over 100 directing credits to his name, but The Black Scorpion is his only horror film. But the bigger star here is animator Willis O'Brien and Pete Peterson, who did the stop motion of the giant scorpions in what would be his last special effects film. Previously, Willis O'Brien worked on The Lost World, Son of Kong, and Mighty Joe Young, and an uncredited visual effects supervisor on King Kong. This one also stars Richard Denning, who we previously encountered in Creature from the Black Lagoon, where he played greedy Mark Williams, who was hell-bent on capturing the creature and bringing back proof. This time he plays a happy-go-lucky geologist who falls for a girl who looks just like Eva Mendes. Okay, so we had ants, we had a praying mantis. This time we have scorpions. Yes, giant saliva-dripping scorpions are let loose upon Mexico after a volcanic eruption, and only 2 geologists are capable of slaying the beast. Just like in Them, they go to their lair where they find multiple scorpions and Lord knows what other kind of worm-like thing with arms lurking about. They seal off the entrance with dynamite and all is right with the world once again. And just like in Them, we learn that is not the case. The scorpions pop up again, attack a train, and head towards Mexico City for more senseless destruction. This time, our 2 heroes learn of a sweet spot on the scorpions, just like Smaug the dragon in The Hobbit. So they do the only sensible thing, and that is to lure the giant scorpion to a stadium with a bunch of meat so they can trap it and pierce its soft spot with a spear hooked up to an electric current. Why the hell not? Despite the silly drooling close-up of the scorpion's face, which, I don't know, I have never encountered a scorpion in real life, maybe they do slobber all over the place, I enjoyed this film. I especially like the stop-motion scorpion effects as it makes these creatures seem fast and menacing and certainly something to be feared if encountered. And just like quicksand in the 70s, I was always taught that scorpions are out to get you and can kill you with their poisonous stingers. How about you guys?
I mentioned earlier that I love it when they make the creatures, they actually physically build the monsters. The only way that I could get around that if it's stop animation. And I think these are so fun to watch. The attack on the train is incredible.
And the lineman.
And the lineman,
attack on the lineman is great. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you see the tail whip over and keep stabbing the guy, and you're like, God damn.
Yeah. And he's got blood on his mouth, like pretty bloody for the era.
I mean, it's very quick-moving creature, right? It's not like a lumbering slow or something you can run from it. It's animated pretty quickly, so it's definitely a threat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the difference. I think that the benefit you get with the stop animation is it's more lifelike than when you have an oversized animatronic thing that's obviously not going to move as quickly.
Yeah.
But then you do get the close-ups of the giant one with the slobber problem, which again, I don't think that's what a scorpion's mouth looks like or head looks like. But if I'm sitting in the audience, I'm gonna go, "Oh fuck, that's awesome."
I know. I'm like, is that what a scorpion looks like up close?
It's got like googly people eyes and it drools all the time.
Teeth everywhere and fucking pinchers with teeth on them. I'm like, Jesus Christ, this thing's like a battle tank.
Some poor kid's picking up a real scorpion going, is that really what they don't look? And ow.
Ow, ow, ow. Yeah. I gotta say, after having watched the Creature movies so recently, it was refreshing to see Richard Denning as a good guy. He's so much more fun to watch like that. I mean, he was great in the Creature, don't get me wrong, but he's such a great protagonist. He's so fun in that way. I really enjoy him in this movie. He might be my favorite of the protagonists in all the films that we've watched. He was just fun, except he does one thing that I rewound and watched 4 times because I couldn't believe I saw it. Then I had to watch it again. Then I had to rewind it and show it to my wife. And then I had to watch it again. So in the early scene, when they find that wrecked car and they go exploring, the police car, and they go exploring. Yeah, the police car, and they go exploring, and they find that baby. They've got Richard Denning has a gun in his hand with his finger on the trigger.
He's pointing,
and they find the baby, and he points a gun with the hammer back at the baby.
That was hysterical. I totally caught
He's a
that.
geologist. He's not he doesn't know how to use a gun. He's used to using a hammer.
That's great. He was like,
it was crazy. I was like,
baby.
It was like, look at that little silly baby. Yeah. Finger on the trigger. Like we all know, like, anybody who's around firearms knows, trigger discipline. You don't have your finger on the trigger until you're ready to pull the trigger. You certainly don't have your finger on the trigger and the hammer back when you're pointing the weapon at a baby, like and it's just one of those weird little things.
One thing to learn from this movie. When you're picking up deserted babies, make sure the hammer's back and you get your finger off the trigger.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. I couldn't believe that that nobody caught that the script supervisor, the DP, nobody, Denning himself wasn't like, hey, wait a minute, am I supposed to point this at the baby? Is that right?
Well, that's like in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Oh yeah,
there's a scene where the cop has the gun in his hand. He's like scratching the top of his head with it,
pointing at people. You go that way. You go, yeah. You'll see that a few times in the earlier these type of films where actors that obviously weren't used to using firearms it's a prop, so it's kind of like pointing.
Do you remember that Simpsons episode where Homer got a gun and he was using it to do shit like turn the TV off and stuff? He was shooting the TV off. That's how I felt about Denning in this. He's like, use it to point at the baby, sure.
But yeah, he's very opposite of his character in Creature from the Black Lagoon. He's so happy-go-lucky in this film, and when he meets the Eva Mendes lookalike,
Mara Corday.
I'm watching. I'm like, who the fuck does this girl look like? I'm like, oh my god, she's like a spitting image of Eva Mendes. It's nuts.
No, Eva Mendes is a spitting image of Mara Corday.
But he just
Mara Corday was a big deal in her day. She was a Playboy Playmate in '57. She was
really
58.
That's right. Big pinup girl.
Oh.
Although that's back when they had clothes on though.
Oh.
But no, she was in Tarantula. She was in The Giant Claw.
I was going to say we could have literally done an episode Mara Corday's big bug movies, and
Well, Giant Claw's not a big bug.
Yeah. Well, we could. I'm sorry,
bird.
Giant monster
Big
movies.
turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Big Turkey. No, I freaking love her, and we'll watch her in anything. But she became good friends, and I think we even talked about this when we did The Giant Claw. But she became good friends with Clint Eastwood, because he was an extra on Tarantula, and then he was also in what was the she met him on that one. I think there was another film that she was in. Anyway, when Clint Eastwood started directing films, he gave her little bit parts in her movies like Sudden Impact and the Gauntlet. She
Yeah.
appeared in there.
Yeah,
So I've always loved watching her.
she's in the diner scene that ends with "Go ahead, make my day."
Yep, that's her, the one that puts all the sugar in the coffee.
Yeah, yeah. So I think she's a really interesting person. You know, she's got a real presence on screen. That love affair happens kind of out of nowhere, but
Yeah.
you're okay with it. You know.
Yeah.
Well, and I can actually in both of our films, the love affair is just kind of like, where the fuck did this come from? You know?
It's like a prerequisite that all these movies had to have something like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's a single woman ranch owner that's controlling this huge thing, but she's still got to be the helpless damsel in distress, which you kind of like on. It's like you guys set this up, and then you're going to go break away from what you set up anyway. Although I will say, I wanted that little fucking Juanito to get killed so badly.
Yeah.
The little kid that was always in trouble, always doing shit he wasn't supposed to. I was waiting. Please let the scorpion sting the shit out of this little bastard.
Yeah, because he kept admonishing Pancho the dog, and I was like, Pancho's not doing anything wrong. Pancho's telling you what's going. He's telling you there's something bad happening, and you keep Pancho.
I like how this movie was set in Mexico. It kind of makes it a little different than a lot of the other stuff. Always like the U.S. being attacked.
Yeah, well, it was filmed in Mexico too.
Yeah.
At one of the studios down there, and then apparently Richard Denning did not have a lot of fun while there because he came back with. He said, "Aaron, you might want to unplug your earphones." He came back with an intestinal amoeba and dysentery and hepatitis.
Jeez.
And he said,
"Don't eat from the street carts," Richard.
when they would break for lunch and they had sandwiches, the flies were so thick, it was almost impossible to take a bite of the sandwich and not eat some flies because it was so
disgusting.
thick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'd be like, "Can we go into a tent or something to have the sandwiches?"
So Mexico is worse than the Amazon when he was filming.
Well, apparently, at least he survived this one though.
Yeah. So
Yuck.
One of my favorite scenes in this movie is when they go down in the cavern. They lower him in this rope elevator, whatnot, and it literally seems like they lower him into hell. It feels like they get out and now they're like in a Bosque painting or something, because there's this like weird worm creature, large 30-foot worm, but it has arms. I'm like, where did this movie suddenly turn into? Now we're in like literally in hell with demons coming out. Trapdoor.
And it's hell because then that kid shows up.
I have a feeling that one of the producers probably said something to O'Brien when, "You got anything else we could put in here to maybe the scorpions can fight?" And he's like, "I got this worm thingy here. Yeah, that'll work. Let's put that in there."
They're saying that supposedly some of that stuff is left over from the scenes cut out of King Kong.
It could be. But now O'Brien didn't do the actual animating. That was Peterson.
Yeah.
Who apparently was suffering from cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy, one of the two. The guy was not well, and he was still animating. So kudos to both of them for making it look. Yeah, that it's very effective animation, I think. Although we also learned that there are two kinds of scorpions. There's the badass scorpions, and then there's those big motherfucking ones that make the big scorpions look like little ones. Because that badass comes out, starts tearing shit up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we were talking about that when they lower him down into that Hieronymus Bosch painting, and I love that sequence too because it really ends with one of the most suspenseful sequences in the piece when the other doctor, I can't remember his name, he refers to him as Doc all the time, but the other geologist has to grab onto a metal cable and ride it all the way up. And there's just really nice reactions and cuts back and forth to like, make it sink in as to what a rotten thing it is to have to grab a cable and be hauled 300 feet up out of a cavern, and it's a brilliant little piece of editing. They really do a great job with that sequence. Super suspenseful, and it's like I don't think I've ever seen a piece of action that's mostly about a crane hauling something up be quite this suspenseful before. So kudos to the director and the editor and everybody involved for all that. But I will say one thing about that stop motion claymation animation. It's great. It is great when it's monsters, but as soon as there's a person in it, it's pretty obvious that you're looking at not a person. Like the sculpted version of a human is usually not so hot at at this stage.
Mr. Bill meets the scorpion.
Yeah.
And
the other doctor is Arturo Ramos, who is Carlos Rivas. Him and Little Juanito were in another stop animated movie, The Beast from Hollow Mountain.
Yeah.
And I read about that actor too, Carlos Rivas. He's an interesting guy. He started, he and Ricardo Montalban and some other people started an organization to try to help the way that Latinos are portrayed in films. And I thought that was really interesting. Just that he was cognizant of the fact that very often Latinx or Latino people are just sort of portrayed in a very unflattering way. Second banana characters and whatnot. But that's kind of what happened to him, right? Like he had one big starring role. I can't remember the film. And then pretty much after that, he's always kind of like, the best that he ever does is like his role here, where he's kind of a second banana to another character.
He did a lot of episodic television. He made quite a few movies and stuff, but nothing huge.
Like Black Scorpion.
Not as big as that.
Which
drooling, googly-eyed scorpion.
Whatever reason that they felt like they needed to use the sounds from them for the Black Scorpion as well, which is very odd when you watch these three movies back to back. I'm like, is this the same sound? And they just put like growling over it.
They're second.
It is the same sound. Yeah, they did reuse exactly the same sound, but again, it goes back to a thing that we talked about in the Creature episode. Excuse me. The thing that we talked about in the Creature episode was how in 1954 there was no expectation. Even 1957, there was no expectation that there was going to be a way to see these films kind of ever again after their theatrical run. There might be a repertory showing somewhere along the line, but no way that you would ever have predicted in the 1950s that a podcast like ours, well, they wouldn't know what a podcast was, but that like a way of viewing the film side by side like this would have ever been possible. I mean, nobody ever thought about that. So why not recycle that? It was a thing that was scary 4 years previously or 3 years previously when when Them was made. And it's like, okay, well, we've got it. We know it worked back then. Nobody will ever remember it exactly because most movie-going audiences had seen 40 more films at the theater since that had happened.
Like, we're going to need some southeastern red-bellied tree frogs.
And the one northern gray. Yeah. His name's Carl. Carl the gray tree frog.
Does a lot of voice work.
That's right. Got like a little ascot on. It's very important.
So like you, John, where your Deadly Mantis is your favorite giant bug movie. While I think Them is definitely the best giant bug movie, I have a soft spot for Black Scorpion. I think that this one's a lot of fun. Especially just if for nothing else, the scorpion looks so damn threatening in it.
I think the attacks are probably some of the best attacks in these films because of what we talked about, the stop animation. You get to see it attack a train and the helicopter and the tanks and stuff. Not really attack, it just tears that shit up like it's paper mache.
You get like the scorpion. I mean, it's a creature built to attack, right? Pinchers, big fucking lobster claw pinchers, and then this deadly tail with a stinger that injects you with poison till you blow up. It's a creature built on destruction and killing anything.
It's a shark bug. Yeah.
So luckily, I've never encountered a scorpion in person anywhere out in the wild.
Don't look on your shoulder.
I'm sure I would be terrified if they were a thing in New Jersey.
I was gonna say we should go for a trip to the desert sometime.
No, I won't even go there. Too damn sunny, and scorpions.
Giant ones.
No,
The list of places you will go is shorter than the list of places that you won't. So
pretty
I'll
much.
go to the kitchen, the living room, the dining room,
a movie room. Yeah, a lot of places. No, I think you're hard pressed to find some of these films in this era, even the more cheesier ones, even like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. I mean, that's pretty close to as cheesy as you're going to get, but they're still fun. The effects can be kind of laughable, but I still think they're kind of nostalgic in a way where they're, I don't know, I just find them charming, and I like what they came up with, the stories on how they became how they are or what they are. Sometimes they just pass over that stuff, or they come up with just some of the craziest science that you're just going, that makes literally no sense whatsoever.
I think
Well,
too, if you're going to check out these movies and watch them and enjoy them and have a good time with them, there is plenty others to be explored too. I think, like we talked about, the beginning of the end. I think that's a really good film. Tarantula, The Monster That Conquered the World. I think these all really fit well into this giant monster category, or bug category, and there's plenty more than these three to explore as well.
You talking about the monster that challenged the world?
Challenged the
big
world,
mollusk?
yeah. The monster that challenged
That's
the world.
a giant mollusk. That's up there as one of my favorites too, because they built the actual creature. That fucking thing's amazing. And you see a guy getting all of his liquids sucked out of him, and his whole body just kind of sucks in there. That's a pretty cool effect. So yeah, that's another great movie.
And I think, it has become such a common piece of our sort of collective folklore that these films are a kind of one-to-one examination of anxieties of that era. And I think there's probably some truth to that, certainly. But I also think, so I think that's one thing. There's one aspect of watching these films that you can watch them to examine those anxieties. But I also think that you can kind of consider the fact that it has hardened into a certainty about that being what these films were quote unquote about, that can tell us something about kind of how we interpret media as well. Like we're looking for very often a way to easily kind of package a bunch of things together. And kind of like we talked about before, like these latter two films don't have anything to do with atomic anything. So calling them part of an anxiety about the atomic age may be true, but it also might be a stretch. So again, I think one of the big values here is very often just the kind of little capsule that they create, not even just in the time and place, but just in the sense of what's going on, and how we always kind of assume movies can be a predictor of kind of collective anxieties or collective feelings. But I think that especially, and we talked about a million times, watching a couple of them back to back can really help you see some of that stuff, And like I said too, these three are interesting because the first one is, I mean, it's the trendsetter, it's the mold maker for the atomic big bugs. But these later two aren't really atomic big bug movies at all, but they're certainly part of the lineage.
Yeah. I think by the time you got, like you had said, that towards the end of it, they've already gone past the atomic stuff, and they're just whatever, however it's going to get big, that's what we're going to do, whether it comes from a volcano, or a block of ice. There it is. Okay, here we go. Now what do we do?
Which reminds me of one of my favorite things about this movie was whenever they're about ready to make out on the couch, Richard Denning and Mara Corday, and then the other guy comes in and he's like, "Hey, look what I found! It's a rock with a scorpion in it, 200 million years." And they're like, "I was just about to crack it open," which he does on the pool table, and it comes open perfectly. By the way, like he just kind of like taps on it, and it comes open, and a scorpion just walks out of it like plurp, and it's walking around. And I was like, that is less believable than the giant scorpions themselves. You know, like they should have thought that through. There should have been a better way. Like that was their explanation. Like just they were alive, pressed in rock for 200 million years, and that's how that worked. That was the most ludicrous piece of science in all three of these films. I felt like.
It worked for Jurassic Park.
But that's not what happened. They didn't just go like in Jurassic Park. They didn't go like, "There's a thing in amber," and then crack it open and like a pterodactyl flew out. That was not.
I like the fact that when because this is in Mexico, one of the Mexican doctors like, well, we need this and we need this and tequila.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, well, I know what that's for and what's that for, but what's the tequila for? Oh, that's my coffee break.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're a really good scientist.
And it's interesting. So the other funny thing, right now you bring it up, like the Mexican military totally took a back seat and let the geologists run the program. Like suddenly they're scorpion experts and hunting scorpions. And the army's just like, we'll back you up for whatever you need, but we're not taking charge of this at all. You guys do it.
Yeah. And so to kill it is a soft spot underneath the head. So we're gonna rig up a spear gun with an electrical current. And someone's got to get it to raise its head up so we get this one shot in there. And you're going, right, okay. That's what are the odds of that happening?
Right.
Worked in The Hobbit.
And then the first guy that shoots it, what did he ends up getting electrocuted?
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, because those dinguses didn't coordinate. There were like 5 guys on that apparatus. Nobody was like, hey, turn it off before dipshit here picks it up. But it had to happen because as soon as you see that Richard Denning is standing next to that, the moment they cut to it, the first time you watch this movie, you're going to be like, yeah, Richard Denning's going to end up firing that thing and killing it. That's how that has to play out. I don't know how they're going to get us there, but Richard Denning's going to end up being the one that fires it. Even though what's his name was standing right there, Tonto is basically the character that he plays, right? Like he just But I mean in some ways and I don't mean that to be like insensitive. I'm saying that's kind of in the 50s there was like the great white guy who's the main guy, and then there's the like, the racially ambiguous or racially different than the white guy sidekick guy who in every way is his equal in both of those cases, right? Tonto is equally the Lone Ranger's equal, but in this case, we've just got a guy. It's like there's no way that the other guy, and I can't remember what his name was, because they just kept calling him Doc, but there's no way that Doc is the one firing the electric spear.
Well, it's the same that Mara Corday is single, and the minute Richard Denning shows up, oh my God. Oh my God. And so you're like, well, he is the great white hero for the play. He's going to solve all the problems.
Also, is Mara Corday supposed to be Mexican
in the movie?
Well, her name is Teresa Alvarez, so I would say yes.
Because this movie is packed with Mexicans that don't seem very Mexican to me. I mean, there's several.
The most non-Mexican thing in this movie is when they find that police car, and the transmission comes over the radio, like no Mexican accent, no speaking in Spanish, nothing like that.
Yeah, that was amazing. Whenever the most Anglo voice in the world comes over the Mexican police officer's radio, hello, car 54, is anyone there?
Yes, but they did that in all those war movies from that time. All the Germans were speaking pretty good English.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It's amazing that we tolerated that level of. I mean, just from the perspective of verisimilitude, I mean, those are not, if you're in Mexico, you're going to hear people. I mean, at least give them an accent. I understand why you wouldn't do it in Spanish, I guess, but although it's a perfect opportunity, yeah, right, because you've got a character there.
Especially you're filming in Mexico.
Yeah,
right.
You can't find extras, especially for a lot of the ranch hands and all those people. I mean, you're not busting them in from California. Jeez.
They're these are all definitely movies of their time, for sure.
Yes, definitely.
And it shows you why, all these people who protest the idea, I mean, as we're trying as a culture to set some of these things to rights, and there's this big backlash against it, and you look at these films and you're like you said, it's just obvious that you would use actually Mexican people and not, get a white dude. I mean, one of those military guys that's in the war room is like, that dude's name is Joe Smith. I mean, he is not a Mexican guy at all. And he doesn't even attempt to be. And he's supposed to be part of the Mexican military, and just like, it's ridiculous. I mean, even if you're not into the idea of equality and equity, which, I mean, I don't even want to have that conversation with anybody, but just the reality of it, just being able to look at it and go, that's plausible, I don't know. But like you said, they're a product of their time, and so I'm not going to get too down on them for that. But they definitely point to a way that we could do that a lot better.
Yes, yes, and again, you'll see repetitive themes or stuff that in a lot of, and not just these three movies, but a lot of these were, like I had said before, the woman will be of some sort of educated stature, but then pretty much does nothing.
Right.
Because even Mara Corday in The Giant Claw, she's a mathematician, but yet it's the other guys that are doing all the, figuring shit out. So,
Well, and here she's like the landowner, right? She's the person who runs that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. In every case, as soon as the great white dude shows up or the great man shows up, they just sort of melt and are the only purpose for them anymore is as a love interest. And boy, the end of the Deadly Mantis makes that obvious, right? Whenever he actually takes the camera out of her hands, she's like, "This isn't a place for romance."
Yeah.
I
think I think the structure of Black Scorpion is so much like them, where you have two guys who are certainly not equipped to be specialists in the bug field whatsoever, are thrust into the front lines. They discover these large creatures. They go to where they're burrowed, their home base. They think they destroyed them. They go back. Turns out they didn't. They got to hunt them down and do the ultimate battle at the end. It's the way it's set up. It's a very linear, same structure as them, really. More so than just using the sound. They really took the whole structure from them.
Yeah, because you think they shut the cavern or destroyed or stopped, they saved the day, and then turns out, oops, we forgot about this one.
This also has the funniest ending, and it's not a spoiler. I'm not going to tell you what leads us there, but for those of you who in the audience haven't seen it, but there's the last lines of the film. They look at Richard Denning and Mara Corday and go, "Hey," they're getting ready to walk away, and they're like, "Hey, we haven't finished." And they look back at him, and he goes, "Neither have we." And I was like, "Oh God, that's TMI, Jesus Christ."
Yeah. Some of the male female relationship in these films are not the most updated. Let's just say.
No, but I will say that at least the female characters are strong in all of these movies. They certainly are subordinate. Their plot, the importance of them to the plot is subordinate to the men in a lot of cases. But they're strong, important parts of the films. Their opinions are weighed in. They get to usually participate in some sort of piece of the action. There's even a conversation in them about, like, I'm the only one who's a scientist here. You need a real scientist to go with you, so I'm going with you. So
they're intelligent.
It's not great, but I feel like even with that, for its time, it was still kind of an improvement on some levels.
Sure.
I'm always trying to think about that stuff too. It's easy to criticize, and it's right to criticize a thing whenever it's sexist and it's overtly, obviously sexist. But on a spectrum, on a continuum, in some ways, I feel like it's still a better portrayal of women. In each of these cases, each of these women is strong. They're either scientists or landowners or whatever. They're important people in their society. So
independent,
maybe a little better. Independent. That's right.
Yeah.
And again, like we often say, surprisingly similar things going on between these movies, even though we didn't particularly pick these three because they had similarities in plot that we thought of immediately. We just picked them because we each liked each of them. But there's a lot there.
Yeah. They're making steps.
Yep. They're making steps. Unfortunately, some of them are eye rollers.
Wow.
Some of them are googly eye rollers.
And some of them are droolers.
Oh, my God. So the next time you're dealing with some spiders in your basement or got an ant problem in your kitchen or any kind of insect infestation, before you start setting those traps or spraying that pesticide, remember that things could get out of hand real quick. Or when you're looking for a nice trip back in time when things were simpler, when atomic energy was our friend and bugs were big, stroll down to the 50s and pop in one of these giant bug movies. Then take a minute to admire some of the craftsmanship that went into the making of them, from the actors who are giving it their all to the screenwriters justifying how these bugs grew so much, and especially the special effects and how they were created. Soon you realize that they are fun, they're entertaining, and these bugs, even for Damien, are good for you.
That is a lie.
The thirsty dead become what to forget. The men of time.